Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. As you just saw, I went through the setup of the GFC, Starlink, and powering that all with the Ecoflow Delta 2. So in this video, it's been highly requested that I do a walk around of not only the solar system on the truck, but also the power system that I am using to power the refrigerator, all my electronics, lights, charging electronics, so camera batteries, whatever it may be. And then also the main focus is actually powering the Starlink. So let's go ahead and dive into the video. It's going to be a little bit of a longer one, but there's going to be a lot of information. All right, so first things first, I am running two different power setups on my Tacoma. I know, you may be asking yourself, why the hell are you running two different setups? Long story short, I did one way. So basically adding a dual battery system with a battery management from Redarc underneath the hood of the Tacoma. Quickly found out that I needed more power. So unfortunately, I can only fit a big enough or a certain size battery in my secondary spot underneath the hood. So I was kind of limited there. I ended up adding actually an Ecoflow Delta 2, which is the equivalent to an additional 100 amp hours of power that is also portable. Okay, so that leads me to the first topic. You really have to decide how much power you might be using, and then what I would recommend is adding actually additional usage on top of that. So when buying a battery or a battery pack, the first thing you really need to consider is what you'll be using it for, and then also too, what you may be using it for in the future, because I do believe that when you start going down this path of either buying a portable battery pack or also adding an onboard or secondary battery underneath the hood or on the truck, you really have to consider what you might be using it for in the future, because almost everyone that I have talked to at some point, they always wish they went with either a bigger portable battery pack or also a bigger battery under the hood, again, if the vehicle can support it. All right, so the first thing I want to cover is the first setup that I did, and that is running a dual battery underneath the hood, utilizing an Odyssey 64 amp hour battery. Also utilizing the Redarc 1225 BC to DC battery management system. Basically what that allows is that secondary battery to charge, which is an AGM. So again, it has to charge at a certain voltage and then float at a certain voltage as well, which is different than the stock Tacoma battery. And then that also allows solar input up to 375 watts, which I'm currently running 175 watts from a Renogy flexible panel that is attached to the top of the GFC roof. So all in all, this was a very expensive route to go, but at the time it was the route that I thought was best for my build. Now, some other things about this system. I'm also running the Switch Pro that is purely connected to that secondary battery. So all of my lights, all accessories, the fridge, also power in the rear and then power in the back of the seat of the Tacoma is all running off of that secondary battery. Now I did that in case if I ever did run that battery low enough to where it couldn't crank anything over, I wouldn't be in harm or I wouldn't be able to start my truck in that situation. So the starter battery for the Tacoma is isolated and it is only purely for starting the truck. It will never be drawn with power from the fridge, charging electronics in the rear, or anything in the back seat. I did that on purpose just as a safety mechanism so I would never be stranded. Again, you should always carry a battery pack to jumpstart your truck, but again, just wanted to isolate the starter battery from that secondary battery. So like I mentioned, I am running solar setup with the Redarc system. So I currently have a 175 watt Renogy panel that is secured to the top of the GFC roof using 3M VHB. Now I personally decided to go this route versus using beef bars, which you may have seen in some other builds or some other folks doing. Mainly simply due to the slimmer profile and less height being added to the top of the roof. For parking in garages, I am very limited to how much extra height I can personally add to the top of the GFC. So in my case, in my build, I absolutely had to add a very slim profile solar panel, and that involved just using the 3M VHB tape to secure it. Now on the flip side of that, with solar panels, you actually want airflow going underneath as it acts as a cooling effect. I have noticed when it is extremely hot, for example, anything really over 80, 90, or even 100 degrees, the overall efficiency of the solar panel does decrease, and you can look up that chart online to see if it's something that may apply, where maybe you do want to use the GFC beef bars to basically have an air gap below or between the solar panel and the top of the GFC roof, so you are getting some airflow in between there. Now with 175 watts up on the roof, for me, it has been more than enough to keep that battery topped off and charged, especially in full direct sunlight. I've had no issues, and it is really nice when you pull into camp. You can open up the GFC, you have sunlight, and you don't have to worry about the fridge or anything else really draining the battery at that time. I do have room for another 175 watt panel up there if I truly wanted to, but for my application, I actually like to also use the portable solar panel that came with the Ecoflow Delta 2, and I will use that in certain situations where either I am parked in shade and maybe sunlight is 5, 15, 20 feet away. I can actually pull out that portable panel and put that in direct sunlight, and before you know it, I have 200 watts of solar coming in from the 220 watt panel. Also brings up a very good discussion of, some people will add all of their solar directly to the roof, to the top of the truck, etc., stuff like that. And while it is super easy and convenient to do it that way, I do think having a portable solar panel that you can pull out, move around, and stick in the sun, especially if your vehicle is either faced away from the sun, in the shade, the portable solar panels are just really nice to have as an extra backup. And all combined, I have nearly 400 watts of solar to play around with and keep everything topped off and charged on the truck. So before we jump underneath the hood, show you guys the wiring, I did want to discuss some of the pros and the cons of the first system and running a dual battery setup underneath the hood. Some of the pros, it is separate from the starter battery, which is nice. So again, you don't have to worry about ever killing your main battery by leaving a light on, running the fridge too low, charging electronics, etc., stuff like that. So that is a nice perk to have. The other thing is the Redarc management system is super awesome. I've had no issues with it. I've inputted well over the 300 watts of solar into it as well, and I've had no issues. It always charges the battery, it always floats the battery at the correct voltage, and for me, that is super important, not only for the health of the battery, but also safety as well, ensuring that you're not pumping too many voltage into the battery itself, and also undercharging it. Now, in terms of the cons of running it like this, again, first off, I am limited by the space underneath the hood. So I am running a Rego fabrication secondary battery holder, and the only battery that they recommend or that will actually fit in there currently, again, you might be able to do some research. New batteries are always coming out, but they recommend the Odyssey 34R, which is 64 to 68 amp hours total. So it's not a super large amount, but it is something that you can use. The other thing to note with AGM batteries specifically is you're really not supposed to drop them below 50% capacity, as it's super harmful and super bad for the overall battery health. So realistically, if you divide or take 50% of 64 or 68 amp hours, you're really left with not that much, okay? So that's also another reason why I run the solar up on top, is if I'm parked for a couple days, I need that solar, I need that power up on the top of the roof to recharge that battery. Otherwise, I will run out if I'm stationary, truck isn't starting, and whatnot. So again, I'm only running an AGM in there. There's also lithium that's coming out, but the thing with lithium is it's extremely sensitive to temperature changes, so heat and cold specifically. So the chances of you actually running a lithium battery underneath the hood are very unlikely at this time, unless technology obviously advances and somehow or some way you can efficiently and safely run a lithium underneath the hood. Till then, you're going to be stuck with an AGM. AGM not only weighs a lot more, the size is usually larger, and again, I'm stuck with a limited space underneath the hood to use which is really capping me off at that really 64 to 68 amp hour battery. The other con of this system, and once we dive into the hood area, you're going to kind of see there's a lot of wires. There's a lot of stuff that can actually start to fail, go out. Mice can chew on wires. It's an unfortunate thing, but the more stuff that you start adding underneath the hood, the more fuses, the more connections, it's always going to be a chance for a higher rate of failure. Okay, so it is something to think about versus just adding a bigger starter battery and then a portable battery pack like Ecoflow, whatever it may be. Less likely to fail and a lot easier to diagnose and fix, especially if you're ever in a situation where something does happen. All right, so we are in the engine bay of the Tacoma, and as you can see, the secondary battery is over in the passenger side. And then here is the heart really of the system. So we have the Redarc management system right there. And as you can see, it is actually charging off of solar now. We have the SDHQ terminals. Those were another hefty price, an item to buy. And then we have the main fuses here. And then we have the Switch Pro system that is right there. So the Switch Pro system specifically is running primarily off, or all off, that secondary battery over there. So this starter battery will never be ran dead, or I do never have to worry about it being ran completely dead or not able to start the truck. Essentially, if I'm running everything and for some reason that battery over there dies, okay? This right here is the solar input, so I can always unplug this. I can plug a portable solar panel in there. If I wanted to, I could run it out and capture sunlight that way. So that's super nice to have. Again, this Redarc is fantastic, but when you start adding, I mean, there's a lot of wire back here, guys. And honestly, I did my best to organize everything, but to be honest, at the end of the day, there's just a lot of stuff that is going on with the wiring in the back here. So again, we're running the Odyssey battery with SDHQ terminals, even on this one as well, with the Rego fabrication secondary battery mount. And as you can see, there is not a whole lot of room here. So even if you were to try to fit a bigger battery in here, you're really going to be limited by the space, just by the air intake and the space on the side over here. So that's what it looks like underneath the hood. There is a lot going on, especially on this side. As you can see, got a Blue Seas terminal block. Everything's connected, and there's a lot of stuff that's hiding behind the back panel here. All right, in the rear seat, I am running a Goose Gear full 100% delete. And currently where the camera case is where my 12-volt refrigerator would sit. I have also conveniently installed a Blue Seas 12-volt DC system in the back here. So this is controlled by a little switch here that I can turn off and on. We have the cigarette port, which I plug my 12-volt fridge into. And then we have two USB ports, which is extremely handy. And again, this is all connected to that secondary battery or the Odyssey underneath the hood. All right, so then in the rear, we are running power as well. So this is a voltmeter that has USBs. This is, again, USB and a USB-C. And then we do have a cigarette port as well. So this power in the rear is all running off of the secondary battery or the Odyssey that is underneath the hood. All right, so now let's dive into Ecoflow Delta 2. This is a recent pickup. I've had this probably for about a month and a half now, and I absolutely love this thing. So this is basically equivalent to 100 amp hours. So again, the Odyssey 34R is 64 to 68 amp hours. You can only use 50% of that basically though, because technically we don't want to run that battery really under 12.2 or even 12 volts at the very lowest. So basically half the amp hours that you can use. This is 100 amp hours and you can completely run this thing all the way down to 0 if you truly want to. So basically have a full 100 amp hours of usable power. The other thing, this is portable, so you can take this in and out. You could use it in the house. If you were traveling, needed to charge something in a remote area, this is portable, you can do that, and all of that. There's also an inverter built in, so there's AC, DC, and USB-C outlets. And this thing can charge at an insane amount of over 1,000 watts. So it will go 0 to 80% in less than 60 minutes. And it will also output an insane amount as well. You could basically run a microwave off of this thing for a short time, but you can run a microwave off of this. So this leads me also to what would I do differently if I knew what I knew now way back then. First off, I probably wouldn't have done the whole Redarc management system underneath the hood. I would have just done a larger stock or a larger battery in the stock location. I have a friend that did that, and I believe he's running an AGM that has about 80 amp hours, so it is slightly larger. He runs his fridge, his lights, everything else in the truck off of that, and he also runs solar up on the roof. Okay, so if I gotta do it over again, I would probably do that. I wouldn't do the whole Redarc system and adding a secondary battery in that other position. It's very expensive, and again, a lot of stuff can go wrong. Now, I would still run a portable battery like the Ecoflow as well to run other things such as Starlink or anything that requires a higher power draw and can easily be transported in and out of the truck, charged super fast like the Ecoflow can. So I can be ready for trips, especially if I do forget to charge this when I return. It's very easy to just toss it on the wall outlet and really recharge it in a very quick manner as well. A couple other notable things about the Ecoflow Delta 2. You can buy expandable storage. So I believe you can add an additional roughly 300 amp hours of expandable storage to this to make it equivalent to nearly 400 amp hours of usable power. It's great if you are in an area where, for example, if the power grid goes down, could go down for a couple days, you could theoretically use this, the Ecoflow, as a backup generator, especially if there's sun for some reason. You could recharge this in as little as 3 to 6 hours, depending on the total amount of solar that you have connected to this. So to give you some rough estimates of just what this Ecoflow can power, so again, this is 100 amp hours. You can charge a laptop going at 60 watts of output. You can do 16 charges. A regular normal iPhone, you can do 89 charges with this. A household fan that is pulling 40 watts, you can power for 17 hours. A TV that is pulling 110 watts can go for 8 hours. And then a coffee maker that is pulling 1,000 watts, which is quite a bit, will power for 0.8 hours, okay? The other thing that I do like about the Ecoflow as well is the portable solar panel, okay? So that can be a pro or con, but for me, and like I already mentioned, it's nice to have the Renogy panel up on the top of the roof, but it's also super nice to have the portable option. So if I am parked in the shade, or if the truck is positioned in a way that the sun is coming from the rear and not from the front, I can quickly deploy the portable solar panel. That's 220 watts. It's completely flat, portable, easy to open up, deploy, and start capturing the power from the sun, okay? So if you do have anything, or if you are considering getting solar, I would say look at either a permanently mounted option, such as the Renogy that I have up on the roof, and then also a portable option as well. It doesn't have to be 220 watts, but I think a portable 100 watt panel is more than enough to not only keep things topped off, but also charge the portable battery pack. And depending on the size that you have, you might need something slightly larger like the 220 watt one that I have. So currently I do have the Starlink hooked up to the Ecoflow, and where I'm at right now is actually pulling a little bit more power because I am obstructed by some trees here, but pulling 52 watts of power. It is estimated that it will run the Starlink for roughly 12 to 13 hours with no input from sun. Okay, so basically almost a full day. If I had to work remote and utilize the Starlink, that's roughly how long it would last. Now, the other thing that I really love about the Ecoflow is the app. So the app is incredible to use. It's very insightful on power draw, turning things on and off. You can actually turn off the AC, the 12 volt DC, and also the USB. You can dive into other settings, so you can adjust the charging speed. You can optimize the battery charging, so it'll cap off at 500 watts for basically optimizing the overall health of the battery, which is fantastic. So again, if you're not in a hurry to charge this thing all the time, I would say just keep it at optimized battery charging. That way we can truly keep the overall health of the battery at its highest. You can change the car input for charging, the smart generator auto on and off. So again, if you don't want to run this battery completely down to zero, which I probably would recommend, keeping it maybe at like 10-15%, and then also not charging it all the way completely would be extremely helpful. You can set those limits as low or as high as you want. The charge and discharge limit as well. So the battery will start or stop charging when it reaches a certain limit, and then it will also turn off automatically when it reaches that as well. Right now I just have it set 0 to 100%. The screen timeout as well, which is on the actual Ecoflow itself. AC timeout, the DC timeout. So again, if nothing is being used or whatever, those things or those ports will automatically shut off after a certain time period. So lots of information on the Ecoflow app. It will also show the solar input, which is the green 0 watts up there, and then currently the output, which is 32 watts. So it's fluctuating a little bit there. And then the time remaining is 14 hours and 37 minutes. So again, really love the Ecoflow app. There's lots of things that you can do, and also the ability to connect to it remotely, turn off or turn on certain ports is extremely helpful. So I'll be running the Starlink inside the tent. Once we're done with it, I can easily turn off the Starlink with my phone through the Ecoflow app, and then in the morning turn it back on. So never have to leave the tent in order to turn the Starlink on. So now the big question is it all worth it? And if I could go back and change anything, would I? So yes, kind of like I mentioned in the very beginning, I probably wouldn't run the dual battery setup underneath the hood. First off, the wiring and getting that all set up was an extreme amount. It was very costly for myself, as I had to hire that out to get that done, just because I personally could not undertake a job, nor did I have the experience to complete a job like that. If I could go back and redo it, what I would actually end up doing is putting a larger AGM battery in the stock location, like my friend did. I believe he is running close to 80 amp hours in that stock battery location. Again, that's more than enough to run the refrigerator, run any lights or anything else like that, as long as you have additional solar up on top. Again, it's all going to come down to your power draw and how long that power draw is actually happening. If you have a pretty efficient fridge, the power draw is obviously going to be a lot less. But if you are, or if you have a fridge that requires higher power draw, maybe the compressor in there isn't as efficient, that is something that you have to think about, because it is likely to drain that battery a lot more. Now also too, if you put an AGM battery in the stock location on Tacomas, the battery voltage is not high enough because stock Tacomas do not have an AGM, and AGM batteries require not only a higher battery voltage to charge, but also the float voltage is going to be a little bit different. So if you decide to run an AGM in the stock battery location, you're going to have to get a tune such as the OTT tune, which if you own a Tacoma, you probably should already have the tune from a shifting and gear hunting standpoint. But with that tune, you can also get an AGM specific tune that will actually change the voltage at what that stock battery charges at with the alternator. So that is also something else you have to think about, okay? So what I would do is run a larger battery in the stock location. I would still utilize the Switch Pro because that is a fantastic system. I would just not be running or using that Redarc 1225 BCDC system up there, okay? Now, I would also still run this Ecoflow or a similar portable battery just for my application of utilizing Starlink. This also is really helpful for anything else that requires a higher power draw. Now before this, I had a smaller 500 watt hour battery pack that worked well. It was great to just keep in the back of the truck, and I would charge things off there periodically. The other advantage of that is I actually used it quite a bit at home. So just doing stuff around the truck, if I was a little bit further away from an outlet or I didn't have an extension cord that would reach, I would just use the portable battery pack, and it was more than enough as long as it was fully charged. So again, that's another advantage of having a portable battery pack like the Ecoflow or something similar, is that you can charge it, you can take it with you, you can move it around, it's always portable, you can take it out of the truck, secondary battery you can't. So again, those are all advantages that I see for myself with also investing in a portable battery system like the Ecoflow. And again, the last thing I really want to emphasize on the most is you really have to sit down and see what your power consumption might be, okay? Are you just gonna be charging your phone, electronics, maybe a computer here and there, you're not running any accessory lights, etc., stuff like that? Probably a portable battery pack is more than enough. In the future, do you see yourself running a 12-volt refrigerator, adding on accessory lights, lights that you're going to be running when the truck is off, lights that you're going to be running in a camper, whatever else may be? Think down the road, think ahead, and I would say if you think you only need a certain amount of power, I would say always add a little bit more to that and go bigger, okay? It's always nice to have more power than not enough, but if you're ever in a situation where you wish you had more power or you run out of power, there's really not a whole lot that you can do in those situations, okay? So worst case scenario, if you are debating between a 500 watt hour portable battery pack or a 1000 watt hour portable battery pack, I would say save a little bit extra and just go for the bigger battery pack, because at the end of the day, if you have extra juice when you get home, it's not the end of the world. But if you run out of juice when you're out there, there's not a whole lot that you can do unless you're running an extensive solar system to capture the sun's energy. All right, guys, that is all I have for you. Hopefully you found it helpful, insightful, and maybe if you are trying to figure out which power system you want to run, hopefully this video helped you out or helped with that decision a little bit more. As always, if you guys have any questions on the Tacoma build, the Overland build, the power system, etc., whatever it may be, always leave a comment down below. I'd be more than happy to get back to you on my experience or any helpful insight that I can give. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and see you guys in the next video.